I'm Ted Savransky, Teddy Covers, and I'm joined today by Ed Feng from thepowerrank.com. Okay, let's get down to it, Ed, because you are a legitimate March Madness expert. And of course, when we talk about experts, we're talking about someone who has actually A, had success, and
Right.
B, isn't just picking stuff, pardon my expression, out of your ass. You're using hard math and stats to make
Right.
your choices for you. So let's start. You have three basic points that you
Right.
talk about in your articles at thepowerrank.com, talking about how to have success beating March Madness pools. And point number one, it's really clear. Just don't enter big pools. You got to be in small pools. How small are we talking about?
Exactly. I mean, you want to have some kind of return, so I would suggest at least 10 people. But somewhere between 10 and 30 seems to be a pretty sweet range. I published the first edition of my book last year, and with some of the contrarian strategies we'll talk about in a little bit, a pool up to a size of about 100 it worked last year. But anything over 100, you're really asking for it. So, for example, I had a reader last year that won a pool of size 100. He submitted the exact same bracket to a pool of size 1500 and finished 14th. So those are the type of odds that you're looking at.
Which makes perfect sense. I mean, obviously, with a smaller pool size, your odds to win are live, and using your are that much better. And if you use the strategies that we're going to talk about when it comes to picking brackets, you should be especially live in these smaller pools because most of the other
Right.
people won't be doing the same thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And
But
and
so,
obviously,
but I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. But so there is no strategy for winning the $1 billion bracket. Or the
there's
ESPN.com brackets that are going to have a million plus entries, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking
yes.
about smaller office pools, but that smaller office pools, you have the strategy is very, very live to win.
Yeah, exactly. You want to get in a smaller office pool. You're not going to come in first of the 6 million brackets in ESPN, and you are almost certainly not going to get a perfect bracket. Which is something I did a couple years ago, which is a fun piece of analysis when everyone was looking at Warren Buffett's $1 billion.
Shut up! You did you didn't get a perfect bracket, right?
No, no, no.
Did you
I wrote
really?
an article about
Oh,
exactly how impossible.
I'm like I never. I thought it's supposed to like 1 in 125 billion or something. You
It,
have
it,
much less odds of picking a perfect bracket than you do of winning megabucks, correct?
yes, that sounds about right. I mean, a lot of the analysis you see out there is a little bit faulty because you're not exactly picking teams at random. You have a little bit better of a chance. You know that Kansas is not the same as a 16 seed that they're playing in the first round. But yeah, it's that your odds are bad.
All right. Second basic point. We're talking here, of course, with Ed Feng from thepowerrank.com. And Ed, your second basic point when it comes to winning March Madness pools is that you have to pick
Mhm.
a contrarian champ. And of course, last year you used Duke. It worked like a charm. It gave you lots of pub. I give you kudos for that. The question is, will that work again in 2016? And for God's sakes,
Right.
give me some choices here in a wide open year. I mean, personally,
Yeah.
I like a lot of the blue bloods this year. I think Michigan State is live. I think North
Right.
Carolina is live and Kansas. And you're
Yep.
saying maybe you want to go in a different direction.
Yeah. Well, so okay, so it all depends on who the public is picking. And the beautiful thing about March Madness is that ESPN publishes data on that. So last year, Kentucky was a prohibitive favorite, and I had them at pretty high win probability, so about 39%. But 48% of the public was picking them as champion. And so there was the reason to fade them. Because everyone in your pool was picking Kentucky, you want to get away from them and pick someone like Duke, and everyone hates Duke, and that worked out pretty well. So 2016, I don't really know who the public favorite is going to be. And honestly, what I want to see for my readers and for the people that follow my stuff, I want to see Villanova get extremely hot in the conference tournament. I want them to just go crazy from three, be the number one overall seed in the tournament, and have the public pick them. Because they're a team that I'm pretty sure is not going to win the tournament, and we'll talk about that in the third point. Um, because the teams that I do think have the best chance of winning the tournament are exactly the teams that you talked about. Michigan State, for sure. My numbers, they're in my top five, but they probably should be in my top two. They didn't have Denzel Valentine for a while. And they also get the coaching effect. I've actually done some analysis, and Michigan State does play better in the tournament over a large number of games, being about 40 some that Izzo's coached in the last 14 years.
Right. So
Um,
for March Madness, for the purpose of March Madness, that's a very significant sample size because you don't get a lot of 40 plus game coach sample
exactly,
sizes.
exactly, yeah.
Mhm.
And so, this was one of those things I was doing last year. Everyone's like, "Oh, Tom Izzo's a great tournament coach," and I was like, "Yeah, it's garbage." But when I dug in the numbers, it turns out to be true. So that extra point and a half that they're getting from the markets, that's legit.
So
Um,
can you give me those top five teams? Because this way, when our viewers watch this video
mm,
and then see what some of the numbers are next week,
right.
they can find some opportunities out there without having to come back and revisit it.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I like Michigan State a lot. It's hard being here in Ann Arbor, but they're a really good team. I've seen them play. I think they passed the eye test as well. I like this Virginia team, and they're not only good by the numbers, but it's just really hard to get them off their game. They play at that slow pace. Even when they're down, they don't tend to take bad shots, which is something I like to see in basketball teams. And they have Malcolm Brogdon. I think they're a legit team. And North Carolina, there's another team. So this is a team that for me doesn't really pass the eye test. I feel like there's something wrong with this team, but in the numbers they look good. And Roy Williams surprisingly actually gets quite a bit of a tournament bounce, at least from my data from 2002 to 2015. He was actually one of the coaches that outperformed both market and my pre-tourney numbers by the most.
Really?
So those are the three teams I'm kind of looking at.
And Roy Williams would surprise me a little bit in that because he's not noted for necessarily being a great tournament coach. I'll tell you exactly what North
Exactly.
Carolina's problem is. That team cannot hit a perimeter jumper. Their guards are not good shooters. And Marcus
Right.
Page, if he gets hot, that team is live to win everything. If he doesn't, who knows if they reach the Sweet 16. There's
Right.
one last key point to talk about here. And this to me is something that is worth mentioning and mentioning and mentioning again. And you talked about Villanova, how you were looking to fade Villanova. Now, interesting, you mentioned two teams, Villanova and Virginia, and the teams, one of which you liked and one of which you didn't. And yet, for the average fan, those teams are probably grouped together. Teams that have had great regular seasons, but zero recent tournament success. And
Right.
you're saying Virginia more likely to have tournament success this season because Villanova falls into a really bad subset. That subset, of course, teams that rely heavily on the 3-point shot.
Right. Absolutely. So this is one of the things you look over the last 14 years, and no team that shoots an exorbitant number of three pointers has won the tournament. Okay. So on average this season, teams take about 35% of their shots from field goal attempts from 3-point range. That's a little bit higher than the traditional average. The decade long average is about 33%. Villanova shoots about 44% of their shots from 3-point range. This on average is a pretty good strategy because the 3-point shot is more efficient than a 2-point shot, but it really tends to get you in the tournament. And if you just remember the last year's round of 32 game, I think with Villanova, they got into a game with North Carolina State. It was a physical team it was a team that Villanova hadn't seen, and they just got off their game. North Carolina State was able to get in their face enough that their 3-point shooting game was off, and they ended up losing that game. So Villanova is a team that I like to fade. Not a team that I would suggest picking as a champion. To a lesser extent, Oklahoma is in that same boat. I think they shoot about 40% of their shots from 3-point range. Very, very good team, and I think otherwise a team that really passes all the tests, both by numbers and by the eye test. But their 3-point shooting rate is very high.
Don't back Villanova. Don't back Oklahoma. If you're looking to win your pools, that's from Ed Feng of thepowerrank.com. Anything else that you want to share with our viewers, Ed? One last chance to take center stage and tell us what you want us to know.
Um, I think just have fun with it. I mean, pools are supposed to be fun. I actually think in the long run, it's a pretty good return on investment. I talk about that a little bit in the last chapter of my book. This certainly doesn't mean if you read my book, you're going to win this year. But in the long run, I think it's a good place to, because these people aren't, you're getting in pools with people that don't necessarily know what they're doing in college basketball. And if you're
That's
getting into a pool with someone like Teddy Covers, like run the other way. Don't get in that pool.
my success in pools has not been great, which is one of the reasons I'm interested in talking to you today. Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate your time. Folks out there want to get a hold of you. Where do they find you?
I'm always at thepowerrank.com, and you can always email me at thepowerrank@gmail.com.
Sounds great. Ed Feng here, part of our continuing coverage leading up to the start of March Madness.